Long before Athens would be remembered as the birthplace of democracy, it was a city trembling under the weight of inequality, tradition, and fear. In this age, Solon was born into a noble Athenian family, whose lineage traced back to ancient kings, yet whose wealth had diminished with time, creating a childhood shaped not by excess, but by awareness. He grew up watching a city where law belonged to the powerful and survival burdened the weak, where landowners expanded estates while small farmers slipped silently into debt slavery, marking their bodies and souls with humiliation. From an early age, Solon absorbed the tension of this world, not as theory, but as lived reality, because his noble status granted him access to elite gatherings while his modest household kept him close to ordinary Athenians. This dual exposure forged his character, slowly teaching him that privilege without responsibility rots both ruler and city. Athens at this time was ruled by ancestral law enforced through custom rather than justice, and the Eupatridae aristocracy controlled courts, land, and political voice. Young Solon witnessed how disputes were settled not by fairness but by lineage, and how poverty was treated as moral failure rather than social consequence. These experiences seeded an internal conflict within him because he respected tradition, yet recognized its cruelty. Unlike warriors who sought glory or nobles who sought dominance, Solon gravitated toward learning trade and poetry, believing that understanding human behavior was as important as command. He traveled widely as a merchant, moving through the Aegean, encountering cities ruled by kings, councils, and tyrants, observing how power reshaped societies and how imbalance always led to collapse, whether through rebellion or repression. These journeys widened his vision and tempered his instincts, teaching him restraint because he saw revolutions that replaced one injustice with another, and tyrannies that promised order while delivering fear. Poetry became his voice and his weapon through which he criticized greed, warned of hubris, and pleaded for moderation, using verse to speak truths that direct accusation could not survive. His poems reveal a man deeply anxious about civic decay, yet profoundly cautious about radical solutions, because he understood that mobs intoxicated by revenge destroy what they claim to liberate. Meanwhile, Athens slid closer to catastrophe as debt slavery expanded, families were broken, land was consolidated, and resentment hardened into hatred. The poor demanded relief and threatened violence, while the rich demanded harsher enforcement and feared revolt. This tension fractured the city, creating an atmosphere where tyranny seemed inevitable because Athenians believed only a single strong ruler could impose order. Solon watched this descent with growing dread because he believed tyranny kills the soul of a city even when it feeds its body. His reputation as an honest mediator, poet, and thinker spread quietly until both factions saw in him a rare compromise, someone noble enough to reassure elites and empathetic enough to calm the poor. Yet when Athens formally approached him to assume extraordinary authority, Solon hesitated, deeply understanding that reformers are devoured by expectation, because every change creates enemies and balance satisfies no extreme. Accepting meant personal isolation and historical risk, while refusal meant watching his city burn. He chose duty over comfort, believing that neutrality in the face of injustice is itself a crime. Thus Solon accepted the role not as ruler, but as lawgiver, committing himself to save Athens without ruling it, a decision that defined his moral core. At this moment, Solon stood alone between classes, between past and future, between chaos and restraint, fully aware that his choices would echo long after his own life ended, and that success would never bring gratitude, only survival. This was the beginning of Solon's transformation, not into a hero celebrated by crowds, but into a solitary architect of balance, preparing to reshape Athens by limiting power rather than seizing it, and by choosing law over blood and restraint over domination. As Athens moved closer to open collapse, the tension that had once simmered quietly now surfaced in every street, field, and assembly. Farmers burdened by impossible debts gathered in anger while aristocrats armed their retainers in fear, believing rebellion inevitable. The city no longer argued about justice but about survival because hunger strips ideology down to instinct. Solon found himself walking through a city where neighbors no longer trusted one another and where law had lost moral authority, becoming merely a tool of enforcement. Debt markers still stood on land like gravestones, reminding families that their future belonged to creditors. Fathers watched sons taken as collateral, and mothers learned to measure love against starvation. This reality weighed heavily on Solon, who understood that unchecked suffering always breeds violence. Rumors spread daily that a tyrant would soon rise, promising bread and order in exchange for obedience, and many Athenians welcomed this idea, believing freedom meaningless without stability. Solon feared this more than revolt, because he had seen tyrannies abroad where peace existed only as silence enforced by fear. The aristocracy itself fractured. Some demanded brutal suppression, while others quietly supported reform, sensing that excess had endangered their own survival. Assemblies dissolved into shouting and threats, and the city hovered on the brink of civil war. It was in this atmosphere that Solon's name began circulating, not as a conqueror, but as a last hope. His reputation for fairness, moderation, and moral authority positioned him uniquely, because both factions believed he would restrain the other. This trust was fragile and dangerous, because it placed impossible expectations upon him. Solon himself struggled deeply with the idea of power, because he believed that authority corrupts intention, and that the greatest threat to reformers is the temptation to become what they oppose. Yet he also recognized that hesitation now would condemn Athens to bloodshed. When he was formally chosen as archon and granted extraordinary legislative authority, the city held its breath, because never before had one man been entrusted with such responsibility without claiming tyranny. Solon accepted under strict conditions, refusing personal enrichment, refusing lifelong rule, and binding himself publicly to step away once laws were enacted. This act alone separated him from tyrants, because he framed power as duty rather than possession. Yet the moment he assumed authority, the pressure intensified from all sides. The poor demanded immediate redistribution of land, cancellation of all debts, and punishment of creditors, while the rich demanded protection of property and social hierarchy, accusing Solon of encouraging disorder. Every decision he delayed was seen as betrayal, and every compromise as weakness. Solon responded not with speeches, but with deliberate silence, believing that reaction would cloud judgment. He studied records, listened to grievances, and reflected on the nature of balance, understanding that cities are not healed through pleasing crowds, but through restoring equilibrium. His poetry from this period reveals a man under immense strain, aware that moderation anxiety, extremists yet convinced that extremes destroy cities. Solon framed his task as healing rather than revolution, believing Athens to be diseased, not evil, and that cure required removing excess rather than destroying the body. The threat of tyranny loomed constantly as ambitious men positioned themselves to exploit chaos, and Solon knew that failure would open the door to permanent oppression. Thus, every law he prepared carried the weight of preventing not only rebellion but dictatorship. His nights were spent drafting measures that could relieve suffering without inviting revenge, because he feared that unchecked vengeance would simply reverse roles, leaving Athens trapped in endless cycles of oppression. As word spread that Solon would soon announce reforms, anticipation turned into anxiety, and factions prepared either to celebrate or revolt. The city paused collectively at the edge of transformation, uncertain whether relief or disaster awaited. And Solon stood alone at the center of this storm, fully aware that whatever path he chose would shape not only Athens' future, but the very idea of law as a moral force. This was the moment before action, when thought becomes destiny and restraint must confront desperation. And in this suspended instant, Athens' future rested not on swords or crowds, but on the conscience, judgment, and courage of one Man who refused to rule yet accepted responsibility, knowing that history rarely forgives those who choose balance over domination. When Solon finally revealed his first great reform, it fell upon Athens like an earthquake that shook not walls but identities. The measure later remembered as Seisachtheia, the shaking off of burdens, was not announced with ceremony or triumph, but with the gravity of a surgeon about to cut into living flesh. Solon declared that all debts secured upon the body of a citizen were abolished, that no Athenian would ever again lose freedom to satisfy alone, and that those already enslaved for debt were to be freed immediately and restored to the city. With this single act, centuries of custom collapsed because debt slavery had been woven so deeply into Athenian life that many believed it natural, even divinely sanctioned. Mortgage stones were ordered removed from fields, and land once marked by humiliation was symbolically cleansed. Families long broken by bondage were reunited, and men who had lived years in chains walked back into Athens carrying nothing but dignity and confusion. The poor erupted in celebration, seeing Solon as a deliverer, while the wealthy reacted with fury, accusing him of destroying property rights, undermining order, and inviting anarchy. Creditors who had built fortunes through legal exploitation now faced ruin and betrayal, and some openly threatened violence. Solon stood unmoved between these extremes because he had anticipated this storm, understanding that true reform engaged both oppressor and revolutionary. Yet his decision was more restrained than the masses expected, because while he erased personal bondage and canceled crushing debts he refused to redistribute land or erase all obligations, fearing that such radical leveling would ignite endless retaliation and destabilize the city further. This refusal fractured his support among the poor, who felt betrayed, believing Solon had stopped short of justice and protected elite privilege. Mobs gathered demanding more and accusing him of cowardice or secret loyalty to aristocrats. At the same time, the wealthy intensified pressure, claiming Solon had gone too far and set a precedent that threatened all contracts and hierarchy. Solon poetry from this period reveals exhaustion and isolation as he defended moderation against both greed and rage, writing that he had stood like a shield between two armies, refusing to surrender to either. He believed that law must restrain desire on both sides, because a city ruled by hunger for wealth is as doomed as one ruled by hunger for revenge. The social fabric of Athens trembled as old relationships dissolved and new expectations emerged, because for the first time, freedom was defined not by birth alone, but by protection under law. Former debt slaves struggled to reintegrate into society, carrying scars of humiliation, while elites grappled with the realization that privilege now had limits. Solon personally enforced the reforms, traveling through Attica to ensure compliance, knowing that symbolic law without enforcement invites contempt. His presence calmed some and enraged others, and assassination rumors followed him constantly, yet he refused guards, believing that fear corrodes legitimacy. This period marked the deepest personal cost of his life, because he was praised as a savior in song and cursed as a destroyer in private councils. Friendships dissolved as former allies chose sides, and Solon discovered that reformers are often loneliest at the moment of greatest impact. Yet despite unrest, the immediate threat of civil war receded as the poorest Athenians regained hope, and the city exhaled briefly from the edge of collapse. Solon understood, however, that economic relief alone could not secure stability, because power itself remained concentrated and law still reflected lineage rather than participation. Seisachtheia had removed chains but not yet created balance, and Solon knew that without deeper constitutional reform, Athens would relapse either into oligarchic oppression or tyrannical rule. Thus, even as celebrations and protests echoed through the streets, his mind had already moved forward to the more complex task of restructuring political power, knowing that the hardest Battles were not fought in fields or courts, but within systems that decide who counts and who commands. And so as Athens adjusted painfully to newfound freedom, Solon prepared to challenge the very foundations of authority, believing that only by redefining citizenship and law could the city be saved from repeating its oldest mistakes. After the shock of Seisachtheia began to settle, Solon turned toward the deeper and more dangerous task of restructuring power itself, because he understood that economic relief without political balance merely delays collapse. Athens had long been ruled by birth, not merit, and the eupatridae aristocracy dominated offices, courts, and councils, shaping law to preserve lineage rather than justice. Solon believed that a city cannot survive when authority belongs exclusively to those who inherit it, and that resentment inevitably hardens into rebellion when voices are silenced. Yet he also feared that sudden equality without structure would dissolve order entirely. His solution emerged through careful classification rather than destruction, as he reorganized Athenian society into 4 property-based classes, determined not by birth but by wealth and productive capacity. The Pentakosiumim Hippai Zougitai and Thetes formed a new civic framework where political responsibility corresponded to contribution rather than ancestry. This was a revolutionary idea disguised as moderation, because it weakened aristocratic monopoly without empowering the poorest to dominate the state. Elites were furious because lineage had been dethroned as the sole measure of worth, while the poor felt only partially included because the lowest class Thetes could participate in assemblies, but were barred from high office. Solon accepted this dissatisfaction, believing that inclusion must be gradual to avoid destabilization. He expanded the assembly, giving ordinary citizens the right to vote on laws and decisions, while reserving magistracies for those with resources to prevent corruption and incompetence in autovotants, in vote on laws and vote on laws and decisions, while reserving magistracies for those with resources to prevent corruption and incompetence in administration. The creation of the Council of 400 marked another critical shift, because it replaced informal aristocratic influence with a structured body drawn from the top 3 classes, tasked with preparing legislation and supervising governance. This council diluted concentrated power and introduced accountability, yet remained conservative enough to reassure elites that chaos would not follow. Solon also reformed the courts, granting citizens the right to appeal magistrates' decisions before popular juries, a move that quietly transferred ultimate authority from individuals to law itself. This innovation terrified aristocrats, because it meant that judgment no longer flowed downward from lineage, but upward from collective civic conscience. Solon framed these reforms not as attacks but as stabilizers, arguing that law must be stronger than any man, and that unchecked power breeds tyranny, whether held by one or many. His speeches emphasized restraint, warning that freedom without discipline invites disorder, while order without justice invites revolt. Backlash intensified as both factions accused him of manipulation, the poor believing he protected wealth and the rich believing he invited mob rule. Solon responded with consistency, refusing to amend laws to satisfy pressure, because he believed stability requires endurance rather than constant reaction. He ordered his laws inscribed publicly so all Athenians could read them, binding magistrates and citizens alike to visible standards and limiting arbitrary interpretation. This act alone altered civic psychology, because laws ceased to be whispered in elite chambers and became a shared reference point. Yet Solon refused to enforce his vision through personal power, declining requests to remain ruler or tyrant, because he believed that reform enforced by domination destroys its own legitimacy. Instead, he announced that once laws were enacted, he would leave Athens entirely, allowing the city to adjust without his presence. This decision shocked supporters and critics alike, because it removed the central figure holding balance. But Solon believed that laws must survive without their author, or they are merely extensions of ego. Before departing, he required Athenians to swear an oath to uphold the laws unchanged for 10 years, an act designed to protect the fragile balance from immediate reversal. As he prepared to leave the city he had reshaped, Solon walked through streets filled with mixed emotions. Some praised him as savior, others cursed him as traitor, and many simply watched, uncertain whether relief or disaster lay ahead. Solon accepted this ambiguity, understanding that reformers are rarely loved because they deny absolutes. His constitutional changes had planted seeds that would one day grow into democracy, but in this moment, Athens remained tense, fragile, and unresolved. Factions repositioned themselves, ambitious. Men plotted future dominance, and the shadow of tyranny had not disappeared, merely delayed. Solon departed not in triumph, but in quiet resignation, believing that true service lies in restraint, and that the ultimate test of his reforms would come in his absence. As ships carried him away from Attica, he left behind a city forced to confront itself without the comfort of scapegoat or savior, knowing that the balance he created could either mature into shared governance or collapse into renewed conflict. And in this uncertain space between hope and fear, Athens entered its most defining trial, learning whether law could truly replace blood and whether moderation could survive ambition.
After Solon left Athens by choice rather than exile, the city entered a fragile and deceptive calm, where laws existed but unity did not. His absence exposed the truth he had feared, that balance without vigilance is vulnerable to ambition. Factions quickly reorganized themselves, not around ideology, but around geography, class, and personal loyalty. The hill, the plain, and the shore became political identities, each claiming to represent Athens' true interest while quietly maneuvering for dominance. Ordinary citizens, confused by new rights but lacking experience, struggled to navigate assemblies where rhetoric replaced reason and memory of past suffering slowly dulled. The aristocracy, though weakened, had not disappeared, and many waited patiently, believing time would erode reforms they despised. Among these shifting forces, Pisistratus emerged, not as an open tyrant, but as a calculated populist. He presented himself as a champion of the poor, a wounded hero of the people, exploiting memories of hardship that Solon reforms had only partially healed. Pisistratus understood something crucial that Solon feared, that emotion moves crowds faster than law. Staging an attack upon himself, he appeared before the assembly, bloodied, claiming enemies of the people sought his life and demanded protection. The citizens, moved by sympathy and fear, granted him a personal guard, unaware that they were witnessing the first act of tyranny. Solon, now an aging man, watched this unfolding with despair, recognizing every step as familiar from histories he had studied abroad. He warned Athenians, publicly declaring that they were forging their own chains, yet his voice carried less weight than spectacle. His poetry from this period darkened, filled with bitterness as he lamented that laws cannot save a city whose people choose comfort over vigilance. Pisistratus seized the Acropolis not through force but consent, and declared himself ruler, promising stability, prosperity, and respect for Solon laws. Many Athenians welcomed him, believing tyranny preferable to endless factional strife. Solon stood nearly alone, opposing him openly, refusing to flatter power or seek safety. He confronted Pisistratus directly, accusing him of betraying the city's soul, yet the tyrant smiled, knowing that age and principle had stripped Solon of influence. Despite opposition, Pisistratus was driven out briefly, only to return stronger, using wealth, alliances, and manipulation to reclaim power, demonstrating how fragile reform becomes when ambition learns to wait. Solon lived to see his fears realized, watching Athens surrender freedom gradually, not through conquest, but exhaustion. His final years were marked by sorrow rather than regret, because he believed he had done all that was possible within human limits. He refused to flee Athens or align with tyranny, choosing instead quiet resistance through words and example. Solon's death passed without grand ceremony. His body returned to the earth of a city he had saved once, but could not preserve forever. Yet his ideas did not die with him, because even under tyranny, his laws endured, partially shaping governance and planting habits of participation that could not be erased. Pisistratus' rule, though autocratic, preserved Solon's legal framework, unintentionally preparing the ground for future democracy. This irony haunted history because Solon's restraint outlived his authority, while Pisistratus's ambition had preserved the structures that would later undermine tyranny itself. Solon's life thus closed, not with triumph, but with unresolved tension, a man who saved Athens from immediate destruction, yet could not protect it from itself. His story reveals the tragedy of reformers, that success creates space for complacency, and that freedom requires constant defense, not just wise design. Solon accepted this truth without bitterness, understanding that cities, like men, learn slowly and often through failure. His legacy would only be fully realized generations later when Athenians, remembering tyranny, returned to Solon laws and expanded them, transforming restraint into participation and balance into democracy. But in his own lifetime, Solon died witnessing the painful truth that wisdom does not guarantee obedience, and that even the most just laws cannot save a city unwilling to protect them. And in this acceptance, Solon's final lesson emerged, that the greatest service a man can give his city is not domination or purity, but the courage to limit himself, knowing that history will judge slowly and often long after the reformer has faded from sight. Under the rule of Pisistratus and later his sons, Athens entered a strange phase where tyranny and reform coexisted uneasily, shaping a generation that lived between obedience and memory. Pisistratus ruled with calculated restraint, understanding that brutal repression breeds resistance, while generosity breeds loyalty. He preserved Solon's laws, outwardly allowing courts, assemblies, and legal procedures to function, yet emptied them slowly of independent power by controlling appointments, influence, and narrative. Many Athenians accepted this arrangement because it offered stability after decades of chaos. Grain was distributed, festivals were funded, and public works beautified the city, creating the illusion that freedom and tyranny could coexist. Yet beneath this surface, a quiet erosion occurred, as citizens gradually lost the habit of vigilance, trading responsibility for comfort. Solon's absence now became symbolic, because his principles lived on in law, but not in spirit. Older Athenians who remembered debt slavery and reform spoke cautiously to their children about a time when citizens argued fiercely, yet governed themselves. These stories circulated like embers beneath ash, sustaining a latent awareness that something essential had been surrendered. The tyranny altered civic psychology, teaching Athenians to look upward for protection rather than inward for responsibility. Yet Pisistratus' reliance on Solon's framework unintentionally preserved institutional memory, because assemblies still met, juries still functioned, and laws still existed in written form, allowing future generations to imagine alternatives. After Pisistratus' death, his sons Hippias and Hipparchus ruled without his balance, and their growing paranoia exposed the fragility of benevolent tyranny. Repression intensified, informants multiplied, and fear replaced tolerance, particularly after the assassination of Hipparchus, which hardened Hippias's rule. Athenians who had once tolerated tyranny for peace now experienced its true nature as dissent became dangerous and suspicion infected daily life. In this climate, Solon's warnings resurfaced with new clarity as citizens recognized that stability without accountability eventually turns inward, consuming trust. Exiles carried these lessons abroad, and alliances formed quietly as resentment matured into resolve. The memory of Solon's laws became a rallying reference, not as nostalgia, but as proof that Athens had once governed itself without kings. When tyranny finally collapsed through external pressure and internal resistance, the city did not invent democracy from nothing. It reached backward, retrieving Solon's framework and expanding it. Cleisthenes' reforms would later deepen participation, dissolve factional identities, and institutionalize citizenship, but they rested firmly on Solon's earlier insistence that law must bind power. Thus, Solon's influence extended beyond his lifetime, shaping not events but possibilities, because he taught Athenians to imagine governance without domination. His personal failure to prevent tyranny became historically necessary because it revealed the cost of neglecting vigilance. Athens learned painfully that freedom is not preserved by good laws alone, but by active civic culture willing to defend them. Solon's life, therefore, occupies a paradoxical place as both savior and warning, a man who proved that balance is possible, yet fragile, that reform can succeed, yet be undone, and that restraint demands constant renewal. Under tyranny, Athenians slowly rediscovered this truth through loss and comparison, understanding what they had surrendered only after it was gone. When democracy finally emerged, it carried scars of this journey, embedding checks, memory, and participation precisely because Athens had experienced both chaos and control. Solon's legacy lived not in monuments, but in habits of thought, reminding future generations that justice requires limitation, that power must be shared reluctantly, and that the most dangerous enemy of freedom is not oppression alone, but fatigue. His story through the Pisistrated period demonstrates that reformers plant seeds whose harvest they may never see, and that true change unfolds unevenly, shaped by failure as much as success. Solon had accepted this long before his death, believing that law is a conversation across generations, rather than a command frozen in time. And in this understanding, his spirit endured through tyranny, exile, and rebirth, guiding Athens toward a form of governance that would later influence the world, not because it was perfect, but because it emerged from hard lessons learned through imbalance, restraint, memory, and the enduring refusal to accept that domination is the natural state of human society.
When the tyranny finally fractured and Athens stood again at a crossroads, the memory of Solon returned, not as nostalgia, but as instruction, because the city now understood through suffering what theory alone could not teach. Cleisthenes emerged in this moment not as a destroyer of the past, but as a reformer who understood that Solon's work had been foundational yet incomplete. The challenge before Athens was no longer simply to limit aristocratic power or prevent tyranny, but to dissolve the very structures that allowed factions to dominate collective life. Solon had weakened lineage-based authority, yet regional loyalties still divided citizens into camps that ambitious men could exploit. Cleisthenes addressed this by reimagining citizenship itself, breaking traditional tribal affiliations and reorganizing Athenians into new demes, trities, and tribes designed to mix coastal, inland, and urban populations. This radical restructuring was possible only because Solon had already detached political participation from birth and introduced the idea that law could redefine identity. Without Solon's earlier courage, Cleisthenes' vision would have appeared unthinkable. The assembly gained expanded authority, and the council was reformed to represent broader participation, transforming Solon's Council of 400 into the Council of 500. This change deepened inclusion while preserving procedural restraint, because power was still filtered through institutions rather than unleashed directly. The courts grew in significance, allowing citizens to judge officials, reinforcing Solon's belief that law must stand above individuals. Yet Cleisthenes also learned from Solon's limits by embedding safeguards such as ostracism, designed to remove dangerous ambition before it hardened into tyranny. This mechanism reflected the city collective memory of Pisistratus and the lesson that charisma unchecked is as dangerous as oppression. Democracy did not arrive as celebration, but as cautious architecture built from fear, experience, and compromise. Athenians participated not because they trusted power, but because they distrusted it deeply. Solon's philosophy infused this system as a quiet presence because his insistence on moderation shaped the boundaries within which democracy could function. He had taught Athens that extremes destroy cities and that balance requires institutions, not heroes. Even as citizens debated passionately, they operated within legal frameworks that restrained immediate domination. Solon poetry circulated as moral memory, reminding Athenians that injustice arises when desire outruns law, and that prosperity invites hubris if unchecked. This cultural inheritance mattered because democracy requires citizens who fear excess as much as they desire freedom. The transformation was uneven, contested, and fragile because old elites resisted new arrangements and ordinary citizens struggled with responsibility. Yet the system endured precisely because it did not promise perfection, but participation. Solon's refusal to rule had modeled this ethic, teaching Athenians that leadership means enabling collective judgment rather than replacing it. In this sense, Solon did not create democracy directly, but created the conditions under which democracy could emerge through later refinement. His legacy became clearer with distance because Athenians could compare tyranny, reform, and democracy, recognizing that Solon's restraint had prevented both collapse and domination, even if it could not freeze outcomes. The democratic experiment that followed carried his imprint in its caution, its procedural focus, and its suspicion of concentrated power. Historians later celebrated Athens' democracy for its boldness, yet its true strength lay in its memory of failure and its respect for limits. Solon's life thus completed its arc not through victory or control, but through influence extending beyond intention, shaping institutions he never lived to see, yet enabling a political imagination that transformed governance across centuries. His story reminds us that political innovation is cumulative, built layer by layer through sacrifice, error, and patience. Solon planted the first layer by teaching Athens that justice must restrain both wealth and hunger, and that freedom without balance becomes its own enemy. The democracy that followed was not a repudiation of Solon, but its maturation, because it extended his central insight that no individual should dominate the city, and that law must serve as the shared boundary within which human ambition operates. And in this long transformation, Solon emerged not as a forgotten lawgiver overshadowed by later figures, but as the quiet architect whose refusal to seize power allowed others to learn how to share it. His influence enduring not through command, but through example, shaping a civic culture that valued restraint, memory, and participation over spectacle, force, and domination.
As the institutions Solon had inspired continued to evolve beyond his lifetime, the man himself slowly emerged from behind the laws as a deeply complex human being, whose inner world was as conflicted as the city he tried to save. Solon was not a cold architect of systems, but a poet whose verses revealed doubt, frustration, restraint, and a constant struggle between desire and discipline. Unlike tyrants who celebrated themselves, Solon used poetry to criticize his own society and himself, believing that self-examination was the first duty of citizenship. His poems speak repeatedly of hubris as the great destroyer of cities, warning that wealth, power, and success intoxicate the human mind until moderation is forgotten. This obsession with balance was not abstract, but personal, because Solon felt temptation keenly, aware that he too could have seized power and ruled Athens absolutely had he wished. Many begged him to do so, believing tyranny under a just man preferable to chaos. Yet Solon refused, haunted by the knowledge that good intentions rot when unchallenged. His poetry confesses this tension, describing how ambition whispers seductively and how restraint requires constant effort rather than passive virtue. Solon did not portray himself as morally pure. Instead, he admitted fear of blame, fear of failure, and fear of being misunderstood. Yet he chose limitation deliberately, believing that personal sacrifice was the price of public stability. His verses criticize both the greedy elite and the impatient poor, revealing a man unwilling to flatter crowds or protect privilege. This impartiality earned him isolation because humans prefer champions to judges. Yet Solon believed that siding fully with either extreme would doom the city. His philosophy centered on the idea that justice is not achieved by fulfilling desire, but by restraining it equally across society. This belief aligned with his understanding of human nature as fundamentally driven by excess when unchecked. Solon observed that men rarely recognize injustice while benefiting from it, and rarely accept restraint while suffering, which made governance a tragic art, requiring compromise rather than heroism. His personal life remains shadowed by absence because he chose public duty over family, fame, or pleasure, leaving little record of intimate relationships, suggesting a man who sacrificed private fulfillment to preserve civic order. Critics later accused him of timidity or half measures, arguing that stronger action might have prevented tyranny. Yet Solon anticipated this critique and answered it within his poetry, stating that force creates obedience but not harmony, and that harmony alone sustains cities. His travels reinforced this conviction because he had seen powerful rulers fall violently and free cities collapse through internal rage. Solon thus positioned himself between idealism and realism, accepting imperfection as the cost of endurance. His ethical framework rejected both fatalism and utopianism, insisting that humans can improve governance but cannot escape flaw. This humility distinguishes him from later philosophers because Solon grounded theory in lived experience rather than abstraction. He viewed law as a living agreement shaped by circumstance rather than divine decree, and believed that reform must evolve with memory. His willingness to leave Athens after enacting laws was an ethical act because he understood that authority clings and that withdrawal can protect legitimacy. Solon's poetry mourns the loneliness of this choice, acknowledging that reformers often lose friends and certainty, yet he accepted this as necessary cost. His legacy, therefore, lies not only in institutions, but in a moral posture that values restraint over dominance, patience over purity, and responsibility over recognition. Through Solon's example, Athenians learned that citizenship demands self-control and that freedom survives only when individuals accept limits upon themselves. This lesson resonated across generations, shaping democratic culture by embedding suspicion of unchecked ambition and respect for procedural balance. Solon's flaws were inseparable from his strengths because his caution prevented both collapse and absolutism, even as it allowed tyranny to arise temporarily. History thus judges him not by outcomes alone, but by intention and method, recognizing that he operated within constraints that later generations only understood after failure. Solon's story reminds us that political wisdom is rarely rewarded immediately, and that the deepest influence unfolds slowly through habits, thought, and memory rather than decree. His poetry endures because it captures the eternal tension between desire and discipline, revealing a man who understood that cities fall when citizens forget that freedom demands restraint, and that justice requires the courage to deny oneself power even when offered. In this, Solon stands as one of history's most human reformers, neither saint nor ruler, but a thinker who accepted imperfection and chose balance, knowing that history would judge him slowly and often unfairly, yet believing that the survival of the city mattered more than his own vindication. As generations passed and Athens' democracy matured, fractured, faltered, and revived, the presence of Solon remained woven into its political conscience like a quiet constant, rarely invoked by name, yet deeply embedded in practice. Later Athenians often celebrated Pericles, generals, and orators, yet when crisis struck, they returned instinctively to Solonian principles of balance, restraint, and law above men, because his reforms had shaped not merely institutions, but habits of thought. The assembly, courts, and councils functioned with an inherited suspicion of concentrated authority, a reflex born from the memory of both aristocratic abuse and tyranny. And this reflex traced directly to Solon's refusal to dominate. Unlike later leaders who thrived on charisma, Solon's legacy discouraged hero worship, teaching Athenians to distrust saviors and demand accountability. This moral DNA distinguished Athens from many other Greek polis, where lawgivers imposed rigid systems through force or divine sanction. When Athenians compared themselves to Sparta, they recognized the contrast between Solon's flexible moderation and Lycurgus's severe rigidity, because Spartan order endured through discipline and silence, while Athenian freedom endured through argument and participation. Solon anticipated this difference by rejecting the idea that virtue can be engineered through obedience alone, believing instead that citizens must learn judgment through engagement. Comparisons with lawgivers such as Zaleucus or Charondas further highlight Solon's uniqueness, because while others codified law to stabilize hierarchy, Solon codified change itself, embedding adaptability into the system. His willingness to leave laws imperfect allowed future reformers to adjust without creation, creating a tradition where amendment replaced revolution. This continuity mattered because it enabled Athens to absorb shocks, war, plague, and faction without abandoning its core identity. Solon's influence extended beyond Athens as well, because philosophers, historians, and statesmen across the ancient world studied his approach as an example of measured reform. Aristotle praised him for occupying the middle ground, and later Roman thinkers admired his insistence that law must reflect human nature rather than idealized virtue. Even critics who argued that Solon failed to prevent tyranny acknowledged that his framework made tyranny temporary rather than permanent, because it preserved institutional memory that could be reactivated. Time thus reframed Solon's apparent failures into necessary lessons, showing that no system can protect freedom without active citizens. Memory played a decisive role in this process, because Athenians remembered both the pain before Solon and the oppression after him, allowing them to value moderation not as weakness, but as survival strategy. Festivals, poetry, and public discourse kept these memories alive, ensuring that political debate was anchored in shared experience rather than abstract ideology. Solon's own poetry contributed to this cultural memory, functioning as ethical commentary that warned against excess regardless of faction. Through these verses, Athenians inherited not commandments, but questions, encouraging self-examination rather than obedience. Power in Athens therefore remained contested but constrained, because Solon's legacy normalized disagreement within boundaries rather than suppression through force. This approach contrasted sharply with empires, where order was maintained through fear and where reform required violence because institutions lacked flexibility. Solon's belief that justice must be visible and accessible influenced Athenian insistence on public law courts and citizen juries, embedding transparency into governance. Even when democracy later drifted toward demagoguery, the presence of these institutions limited damage because accountability mechanisms could still be invoked. Solon's legacy also shaped how Athenians understood time itself, because his reforms taught them that political progress unfolds across generations rather than lifetimes, encouraging patience and responsibility toward the future. This long view distinguished Athenian civic culture from regimes obsessed with immediate control and allowed citizens to tolerate imperfection without surrendering agency. Solon's story thus became a reference point for debates about reform, reminding Athenians that abrupt purity often leads to collapse, while cautious compromise can sustain life. His name was invoked during moments of crisis, not as an idol, but as a reminder that freedom survives through balance and that law must evolve alongside society. In this sense, Solon's greatest achievement was not any single reform, but the cultivation of a civic temperament resistant to extremes. His influence extended into philosophical thought as well, shaping Socratic inquiry, which emphasized questioning authority and examining assumptions, reflecting Solon's earlier insistence that law must be justified rather than accepted blindly. The endurance of this mindset explains why Athens, despite military defeat and political turmoil, continued to produce ideas that shaped Western thought, because Solon had taught the city how to argue without annihilating itself. Power, for him, was never an end, but a responsibility bound by limits, and this conception slowly permeated Athenian identity. Memory preserved this lesson through stories of tyranny and reform, ensuring that each generation confronted the cost of forgetting balance. Solon thus stands as a figure whose true monument was not stone or decree, but a living tradition of measured freedom capable of renewal through reflection. His legacy demonstrates that the most profound political influence often operates invisibly, shaping norms, expectations, and reflexes rather than commanding obedience. By refusing to rule, Solon taught Athens how to govern itself over time, accepting conflict as inevitable, yet containable. This achievement remains remarkable because it acknowledges human imperfection while still insisting on justice. Through time, Solon became less a historical actor and more a moral compass, guiding debates about power, law, and responsibility, reminding citizens that stability arises not from domination or purity, but from the disciplined willingness to share authority and accept limits for the sake of collective survival.
As Athens moved further away from Solon's lifetime and deeper into the age of imperial ambition, the way his legacy was judged slowly transformed, revealing as much about the city's changing values as about the man himself. Early historians, such as Herodotus, portrayed Solon with reverence, not because he had created perfection, but because he embodied wisdom shaped by experience, restraint, and travel. Herodotus emphasized Solon's encounters with powerful kings like Croesus, using these stories to illustrate his central insight that no man can be called happy until his life is complete, and that fortune shifts relentlessly. This moral lesson reflected Solon's belief that power, wealth, and success are temporary, and that law must account for instability rather than deny it. Later thinkers such as Aristotle approached Solon more analytically, praising his moderation and constitutional innovations, while also critiquing what they perceived as his failure to go far enough to secure democracy permanently. Aristotle argued that Solon deliberately designed a mixed constitution, balancing oligarchic and democratic elements because he understood that extreme systems collapse under their own weight. This interpretation highlighted Solon's intention to stabilize rather than revolutionize. Yet it also exposed a tension in historical judgment, because later generations often demand clarity and purity from figures who operated within ambiguity. As Athens' democracy expanded and imperial confidence grew, Solon's restraint began to appear timid to citizens intoxicated by naval power, wealth, and global influence. The very moderation that once saved the city now seemed inadequate to those who believed Athens destined for dominance. Public discourse shifted toward expansion, glory, and exceptionalism, slowly eroding the balance Solon had cultivated. Demagogues arose, promising power rather than stability, and citizens accustomed to participation became vulnerable to flattery,
because success had dulled memory of earlier suffering. Institutions remained, but their spirit weakened as procedural safeguards were bent to serve ambition rather than restrain it. The assembly exercised enormous authority, yet often without the caution Solon had emphasized, leading to impulsive decisions driven by emotion, pride, and fear. Wars became instruments of policy rather than last resorts, and imperial tribute replaced civic contribution, altering the relationship between citizens and power. Solon warnings about hubris echoed faintly through literature and philosophy, but struggled to compete with spectacle and conquest. Tragedies performed in Athens often reflected this tension, dramatizing the consequences of excess, arrogance, and defiance of limits, suggesting that cultural memory still grappled with Solonian ethics, even as political practice drifted. The Peloponnesian War would later expose the fragility of Athenian balance, revealing how far the city had moved from its founding restraint, as democratic processes were manipulated to justify aggression, repression, and eventual collapse. Historians looking back identified this period as evidence that institutions alone cannot preserve moderation when collective character changes. Solon's reputation during these years oscillated between reverence and critique, some praising him as a foundational lawgiver, others blaming him for creating a system too flexible to resist demagoguery. Yet this critique misunderstands Solon's intention because he never claimed to design an unbreakable system. Instead, he sought to teach Athenians how to adapt responsibly. The erosion of balance, therefore, reflects not Solon's failure, but the city's departure from his ethical framework. Later Roman writers admired Solon precisely because his approach contrasted with imperial rigidity, valuing adaptability over command and acknowledging human fallibility. In Roman political thought, Solon became an example of lawful moderation, used to critique both tyranny and mob rule. This cross-cultural appreciation underscores how Solon's influence transcended local context, because his insights addressed universal patterns of power, behavior, and decline. The gradual fading of Solon's restraint in Athens thus became a cautionary tale, demonstrating that reformers can shape systems but cannot control how future generations wield them. Memory must be actively renewed, or it becomes decorative rather than instructive. Solon's poetry continued to circulate, reminding readers that justice requires constant effort and that wealth and power test character relentlessly. Philosophers such as Plato engaged indirectly with Solon's legacy, questioning how societies might educate citizens to internalize moderation rather than rely solely on law. These debates reveal that Solon's work initiated an enduring conversation rather than offering final answers. The decline of Athenian balance, therefore, should be read not as a rejection of Solon, but as confirmation of his core warning that freedom is fragile and demands discipline equal to desire. His life demonstrated that reform can delay catastrophe, create opportunity, and embed ethical norms, yet cannot eliminate the human tendency toward excess. History judged Solon harshly only when it forgot the conditions he faced and the alternatives he rejected. When remembered fully, he emerges as a realist who understood that cities survive not by achieving perfection, but by managing imperfection wisely. His legacy challenges every generation to ask whether they value restraint as much as freedom, and whether they are willing to accept limits without coercion. In this sense, Solon's relevance grows sharper with time, because his story reveals that political decline often begins not with external defeat, but with internal abandonment of balance. Athens' eventual fall thus retroactively validates Solon's insight that unchecked ambition corrodes institutions from within, and that laws without civic virtue become instruments rather than safeguards. Solon stands, therefore, not as a failed democrat or incomplete revolutionary, but as a mirror held up to history, reflecting the enduring struggle between power and restraint. His judgment by historians evolves alongside societies confronting similar dilemmas, reminding us that wisdom is often appreciated most clearly only after it has been ignored. And in this delayed recognition, Solon occupies his final place as a figure whose value lies not in preventing all failure, but in illuminating why failure occurs when moderation is forsaken.
As Solon's legacy stretched across time and judgment, his life began to appear less as a sequence of reforms and more as a sustained meditation on human nature, fate, and the limits of power. His experiences as poet, lawgiver, traveler, and witness to both reform and tyranny shaped a worldview grounded in humility before uncertainty. Solon understood that human beings crave certainty, yet live within instability, and that political systems fail when they pretend otherwise. This insight formed the core of his philosophy because he rejected the idea that law could eliminate conflict, believing instead that law must channel it safely. Fate for Solon was not blind destiny, but the accumulation of choices shaped by circumstance, where prosperity tempts excess and hardship invites rage. His encounter with kings such as Croesus illustrated this belief because he saw how confidence in fortune blinds rulers to vulnerability and how success often precedes collapse. Solon's teachings emphasized that happiness cannot be measured in moments of power or wealth, because life unfolds unevenly and meaning emerges only in retrospect. This perspective distinguished him from rulers who equated stability with control and reformers who equated justice with immediate satisfaction. Solon accepted that governance is a tragic art, requiring compromise between ideals that cannot be fully reconciled. Power, for him, was never sacred or absolute, but dangerous precisely because it amplifies human weakness. He believed that law exists not to perfect humanity, but to restrain its worst impulses, and that justice requires equal limitation of both privilege and desire. This balanced skepticism shaped his refusal to rule because he distrusted the moral durability of unchecked authority, even in virtuous hands. Solon poetry returns repeatedly to the theme of self-restraint, urging citizens to recognize that injustice arises when desire outruns measure, and that prosperity without moderation invites divine and social retribution. His use of divine language reflected cultural context rather than literal belief, because for Solon, gods symbolized moral order and the consequences of excess rather than arbiters of favor. Fate, in his thought, operated through natural consequences rather than miraculous intervention, teaching that societies reap what they cultivate. Solon's view of human nature was neither optimistic nor cynical, but realistic, acknowledging capacity for reason alongside susceptibility to greed, fear, and pride. This realism informed his legal design, which assumed citizens would test boundaries and therefore required visible accountability. His insistence on public law, accessible to all,
reflected his belief that secrecy empowers abuse and that transparency disciplines authority. Solon's acceptance of imperfection allowed him to tolerate criticism without retreating into defensiveness, because he measured success not by applause but by endurance. He anticipated that his laws would be altered, misunderstood, or even ignored, yet he trusted that the core principles of balance and restraint would resurface when extremes revealed their cost. This faith was not naive, but grounded in historical observation, because Solon had seen cycles of rise and collapse across cities and recognized recurring patterns of hubris followed by suffering. His life thus becomes a study in patience, because he worked for outcomes he knew he would not witness, and accepted that reformers rarely enjoy the fruits of their labor. Solon's philosophy challenges the desire for heroic narratives because he refused to present himself as savior, instead emphasizing collective responsibility and moral discipline. This humility distinguishes him from figures who seek immortality through domination, because Solon sought continuity rather than glory. The meaning of his life emerges through this choice because he valued the survival of the city above personal legacy and accepted obscurity as the cost of restraint. Later generations often struggled with this lesson, preferring stories of conquest and certainty, yet Solon's endurance in memory suggests that his approach resonated precisely because it addressed enduring dilemmas. The tension between freedom and order, wealth and justice, ambition and restraint persists across societies, making Solon's insights perennially relevant. His belief that law must evolve alongside circumstance without surrendering core values offers guidance to any community navigating change. Solon's synthesis of fate and agency teaches that while humans cannot control fortune, they can shape response, and that resilience arises from humility rather than dominance. His life illustrates that the most profound form of power lies in refusing excess, and that the strength of a city is measured not by expansion, but by its ability to endure disagreement without collapse. Solon's acceptance of uncertainty did not paralyze action, but informed it, encouraging cautious boldness where principles guide, but outcomes remain open. This philosophical posture stands as his final contribution, reminding future generations that governance is not about achieving perfection, but about managing imperfection with wisdom, patience, and restraint. Through this lens, Solon emerges not merely as an Athenian lawgiver, but as a thinker whose understanding of human limits offers a timeless framework for political life. His story invites reflection on whether societies value balance as much as victory, and whether leaders possess the courage to step back rather than seize control. In answering these questions, Solon's legacy continues to speak quietly, urging moderation in an age tempted by absolutes, and reminding us that the measure of a life lies not in domination or acclaim, but in the durability of the principles one leaves behind.
As time continued its slow, indifferent passage, Solon's presence receded from living memory and entered the realm of symbol, where figures are simplified, misunderstood, and reinterpreted according to the needs of each generation. Athens itself changed repeatedly, rising, falling, conquering, being conquered, yet the questions Solon raised never vanished because they were woven into the structure of civic life. Monuments crumbled,
Wars erased boundaries, and empires replaced city-states. But Solon's insistence on balance, restraint, and law endured, not as doctrine, but as reference. Later Athenians invoked his name during moments of crisis, not to copy his actions, but to recall his posture toward power, because his refusal to rule had become a moral benchmark against which ambition was measured. As Athens' democracy evolved into imperial dominance and then collapsed under its own contradictions, Solon's legacy stood in contrast as a reminder of an alternative path, where strength was measured by self-limitation rather than expansion. Philosophers, poets, and historians returned to his story, seeking meaning in the arc of his life, because it mirrored the trajectory of societies that achieve greatness and then struggle to sustain it. Solon symbolized the moment when Athens chose law over lineage and restraint over domination, even if only temporarily. And this moment gained clarity only in retrospect, when later failures exposed its value. Time stripped away political details, leaving behind ethical contours that resonated beyond context. Solon became less a legislator and more a figure of conscience, representing the possibility that power can be refused without surrender, and that authority can be exercised without ownership. His image shifted according to era, sometimes celebrated as the father of democracy, sometimes criticized as insufficiently radical, sometimes dismissed as idealistic. Yet these interpretations reveal more about the interpreters than the man, because Solon never claimed to solve all problems. He claimed only to reduce harm and prevent immediate collapse. His symbolic power lies precisely in this modesty, which challenges cultures obsessed with total solutions and heroic certainty. As Athens' decline became a case study for later civilizations, Solon emerged as the counterfactual figure who demonstrated what moderation might have preserved had it been sustained. Roman thinkers contrasted Solon with figures like Caesar, using him as a warning about the cost of concentrating power even in capable hands. Medieval scholars encountered Solon through fragments and stories, interpreting him as a moral philosopher rather than a political actor, because his emphasis on ethics over conquest aligned with their concerns. Modern historians reevaluated him through the lens of constitutional development, recognizing that his reforms introduced principles of accountability, participation, and legal transparency that shaped Western political thought indirectly yet profoundly. Across these interpretations, Solon remained elusive, resisting categorization, because he operated between extremes, refusing to become a revolutionary or a tyrant. And this refusal frustrated narratives that seek clarity through conflict. His life invites a different kind of cinematic understanding, one that finds drama not in battles, but in decisions made under pressure, where restraint demands greater courage than action. Solon's final judgment emerges, therefore, not from whether Athens succeeded permanently, but whether his example continues to challenge assumptions about power and success. Time has revealed that societies repeatedly oscillate between freedom and control, and that each cycle renews the relevance of Solon's warning that excess invites collapse, regardless of ideology. His symbolic legacy becomes sharper in moments when institutions weaken and citizens look for saviors, because Solon teaches that salvation through domination is temporary, and that sustainable order arises from shared responsibility. The slow erosion of his reforms after his departure illustrates how fragile balance remains without cultural reinforcement. Yet the repeated return to his ideas demonstrates their resilience. Solon's story suggests that memory itself functions as a political force, shaping future choices by preserving examples of restraint. His willingness to accept criticism, isolation, and partial failure in service of stability offers a counter-narrative to cultures that reward spectacle and certainty. As time transforms individuals into symbols, Solon retains his complexity because his contradictions reflect enduring human dilemmas rather than resolved ideals. He was both effective and insufficient, visionary and realist, praised and blamed, and this ambiguity allows each generation to engage with his story anew. Cinematic closure approaches not through triumph, but through recognition that Solon's influence operates beneath events, shaping how societies understand law, freedom, and responsibility long after his name fades from popular consciousness. His life affirms that the deepest form of legacy is not control over outcomes, but contribution to frameworks within which future choices unfold. Solon becomes a quiet presence, standing at the threshold between chaos and order, reminding us that the most consequential acts often involve refusal rather than conquest, and patience rather than victory. As the centuries pass, his figure remains suspended between myth and history, not elevated by legend, but grounded by human limitation, offering a mirror through which civilizations examine their own relationship with power.
This symbolic endurance marks the approach of conclusion, where Solon ceases to be merely an Athenian lawgiver and becomes a universal reference point for the ethics of governance. Time does not diminish his relevance, but clarifies it, revealing that his greatest achievement was not preventing all failure, but teaching societies how to recognize it and respond with humility rather than despair. And in this understanding, the story moves toward its final resolution, not by closing debate, but by opening reflection on whether restraint can survive in ages defined by ambition, and whether the quiet courage to limit oneself remains the rarest form of leadership. In the end, Solon's life does not close with victory or failure, but with a quiet, enduring question that history continues to ask of every civilization that comes after him. What does it mean to hold power without becoming owned by it? Solon walked away from absolute authority at the moment when most men would have grasped it, and in that refusal, he revealed the true axis of his character, because he believed that domination, even when benevolent, poisons both ruler and city. Athens did not remember him with statues towering over battlefields or songs celebrating conquest, but with laws, habits, and arguments that survived him, imperfectly yet persistently. His reforms did not freeze the city into harmony, nor did they prevent suffering, war, or tyranny, yet they altered the direction of collapse, transforming destruction into delay, chaos into debate, and silence into speech. Solon understood something rare, that stability is not permanence, and justice is not purity, and that the purpose of law is not to perfect humanity, but to restrain its excesses equally across society. His poetry, his restraint, and his withdrawal all spoke the same truth, that human beings must be protected from both oppression and themselves.
History often rewards those who seize power quickly and punishes those who choose patience. Yet, over time, the noise of domination fades, while the quiet architecture of restraint endures. Athens would rise and fall, argue and conquer, betray its ideals, and rediscover them again. Yet each return to balance echoed Solon's original insight, that freedom without limits becomes its own form of tyranny. His life reveals that the most difficult form of courage is not to fight or rule, but to step back and trust future generations to continue the work imperfectly. Solon accepted misunderstanding, criticism, and partial failure because he measured success not by applause, but by survival. He planted seeds, knowing that he would not live to see their full growth, and that others would reshape them in ways he could not control. This acceptance of uncertainty stands at the heart of his legacy, because it acknowledges the limits of human foresight while affirming responsibility nonetheless. Solon's story leaves us not with answers, but with a framework for asking better questions about power, law, and responsibility. He reminds us that societies collapse not only through injustice, but through exhaustion, when citizens surrender vigilance for comfort and restraint for spectacle. His life warns that balance, once achieved, must be renewed constantly, and that memory is as essential to freedom as law. In refusing to become a tyrant, Solon became something rarer, a reference point against which all ambition can be measured. His influence operates not through command, but through conscience, shaping how generations debate authority rather than submit to it. Time strips away details and names, yet Solon's presence remains because his dilemma is universal, faced by every city, every leader, and every citizen who must choose between ease and effort, dominance and discipline, certainty and humility. The endurance of his story suggests that while power fades and empires fall, the question of how to live together without destroying one another never disappears. Solon does not promise salvation, but offers orientation, pointing toward restraint as the foundation of justice and patience as the companion of freedom. His legacy asks whether we are willing to accept limits without coercion, and whether we understand that the greatest threat to a city is not external enemies, but internal abandonment of balance. As the final echoes of his life settle into history, Solon stands not as a hero crowned by victory, but as a man who chose responsibility over glory and law over self, and in that choice left behind something more durable than conquest, a living reminder that the measure of power is not how much it controls, but how wisely it refuses to. And in this quiet refusal, Solon continues to speak across centuries, inviting every generation to decide whether it will rule itself with restraint or surrender that task to ambition, forgetting that freedom survives only where discipline, memory, and shared responsibility endure.